Hi everyone, this is Lydia with Teamworks. Today we're going to look at leadership and your brain. Well, first thing to notice is that it's a phenomenal thing, this brain of ours. If we count the number of neurons in our brain, how often they fire in 1 second, and the number of connections that they fire each second, we end up with our brain processing 20 million billion signals per second. 2 times 10 to the 17th. And of course, much of this is outside, pretty much all of it is outside our awareness. So our brain has evolved some amazing structures to help us make sense of all that input that comes in. Any input that comes into the brain from our eyes, from our ears, from our body, comes in first through the back of this is the back of the head we're looking at here. This is the back of your neck, cerebellum. And so this whole area is the oldest part of our brain, evolutionarily speaking. We evolved it long ago with when dinosaurs roamed the planet. It is sometimes called the reptilian complex because it's not just one thing, it's a group of functions. And it has one job, and that is to keep us alive. This is the reptilian complex. I like to call it the lizard brain. It's the part of our brain that we literally share with lizards. And it has one function, and that is to intervene if there is a life-threatening situation. So the lizard brain can only tell us to fight or flight, or fight, flight, freeze, I'm saying. So if there's an immediately life-threatening moment, we don't even have to have the signal get up into our brain and think about it. Our lizard just can take over and have us to run or have us to fight or whatever we need to do. And our ancestors had very well-developed lizard brains because we're still here. So that's a good thing. We get into trouble because sometimes a lizard comes out, even though most of us don't live with a lot of life-threatening situations these days. We'll talk about that in a minute. So let's imagine that the input that comes into the brain goes through the lizard brain, the reptilian complex, and nothing about it seems life-threatening. Well, then that impulse is allowed to move on through the brain to the middle brain, the limbic system, or the mammalian brain. We share this with every mammal on the planet, every horse and pig and cow and dog. It's easiest to see the mammalian complex in a dog because in this part of the brain sits all of our emotions, our feelings, our habits, and our memories. If the impulse comes into the brain and it elicits any strong emotion, then it processes here in the dog part of our brain. Some psychologists propose that there are not a lot of feelings that we have. We recombine the same small combination, 5 to 7 feelings, emotions in different ways. If you think about the movie Inside Out, there's love, fear, anger, disgust, joy, and sadness. And in this part of the brain, they recombine in different ways, like grief would be love and sadness together. One notable characteristic of the dog brain is that it does not have language. So when we're trying to describe how we're feeling or we're trying to talk about our emotions, sometimes I think that that's one of the reasons it can get really tricky, is our emotions don't live in the same place that our language does. So if the impulse that comes into the brain gets by the lizard, it wasn't life-threatening, gets by the dog because it doesn't evoke any overwhelming feeling, then it gets to move on to the prefrontal cortex, which is the uniquely human part of our brains. Now, up here, we have the ability to think abstractly. We have logical reasoning, planning, mapping, perception, self-control, and remarkably, imagination, creativity, and most importantly, language. Let's go back and look at these. Lizard brain, incredibly helpful. Most of us don't face life-threatening situations, and yet that lizard brain does keep firing. Mostly they get us into a lot more trouble than they get us out of. And then the dog brain. So the thing is, it works almost like a trap door. If your lizard brain gets a hold of the input and acts on it, then you're going to spin in your lizard brain. There's a, if you were in the middle of a fist fight, you wouldn't be thinking about how you're feeling or what your emotions are. So you'd be kind of stuck in your lizard brain. Same thing with the dog brain. If you have a real wash of emotions that kind of overtake you, you sit in the processing in the dog brain, the limbic brain, and this could be good too. Like if you're overwhelmed with love, the expression "love is blind." Wow, it's actually true, because there's a trap door that happens between the dog and the human brain, and if you're overcome with any emotion, be it love or anger or sadness, we then do not have access to that higher part of our brain. I think about my back in college, I had test taking anxiety terribly. So I would walk into a test, I would be so anxious that I couldn't remember anything I used to know. I couldn't process properly because I was so stuck in my dog brain and my anxiety. The goal in much of what we're doing is to create strategies for leaders to successfully move the impulses up into the human brain. Because at the lizard brain, you have 2 to 3 options: fight, flight, freeze. Dog brain, again, small handful of emotions. And up in the human brain, we see possibilities. And truly, the options are infinite if we can get up there to do our processing. These impulses go through our brain at 250 miles an hour, and it's still, I don't know how this works, but still slowing down. I mean, the old, count to 10, there was some real wisdom in that. Because if we can slow down enough, we generally can move that impulse up to where it can be helpful. Even one breath. In fact, that was the homework for this week. When you feel yourself getting triggered, take one breath, because it might very well change what you say next. Then we looked at what are the things that tend to trigger us along the way. So we looked at the drivers of behavior. Now, with each of these, as we get them, we get a feeling of satisfaction, and it is a reward in itself. Well, these will come back up because when you're talking about the people that you lead, your direct reports, they want these things too. And when you can provide them to your direct reports, it improves their job satisfaction and their engagement. But for now, we're just talking about you, the leader. When you don't have them, it creates a sense of threat and sometimes very immediately trigger. So here are the ones that I have determined in my work with leaders over the years. And they are fairness. I'll show you a little film about fairness here.
What we did is we put 2 capuchin monkeys side by side, and if you give both of them cucumber for the task, the 2 monkeys side by side, they're perfectly willing to do this 25 times in a row. If you give them grapes, that's a far better food, then you create inequity between them. So she gives a rock to us, that's the task, and we give her a piece of cucumber and she eats it. The other one needs to give a rock to us, and that's what she does. And she gets a grape, and she eats it. The other one sees that. She gives a rock to us now, gets again cucumber. She tests the rock now against the wall. She needs to give it to us. And she gets cucumber again. So this is basically the Wall Street protest that you see here.
So that is fairness. That is a capuchin monkey with a lizard brain. The second of these behavioral drives is love. When we have it, it's satisfying. When we feel it's being taken away, it can be very threatening. Autonomy comes up a lot at work. Talk about that. A sense of meaning and purpose to our work, that what we do matters. Ego, and it's not a bad thing. I mean, these are natural human drivers, and we've evolved to want to have a sense of status in our community, whatever our community is. So ego is a big driver, and security. And so you can see that acronym is FLAMES. So at work, I see particularly fairness, ego, and security are big drivers. Like those are the more immediate drivers that might make one get really triggered. So the questions that we were left with was, how fully, like I asked each of the leaders, how fully are you getting these drives met today? And how are you likely to meet these needs? Are you likely to get your lizard brain triggered, or wallow in a wash of emotions of anger or sadness? That's in the dog brain. Or are you being strategic and thoughtful and being able to come up with strategies to get each of these needs met? So there you go, leadership and your brain.